I paid for my daughter's wedding down to the last champagne flute, and in return, her stepmother tried to make me eat my dinner in the garden like a dog. They didn't know that by casting me out of the reception, they were casting themselves out of the life I had built for them. They mistook my silence for weakness. They mistook my generosity for an obligation. That evening, sitting alone on a cold, wrought iron chair while the party I funded laughed and danced just a few feet away, they taught me a valuable lesson. Some people only understand a language of consequences. I was about to become fluent. The day had started with a lump in my throat. It's the feeling every father gets, I suppose, when he walks his only daughter down the aisle. Jessica looked like an angel, swathed in white silk and lace, a dress that cost more than my first car. The venue, a sprawling country estate with manicured lawns and a century-old ballroom, was a fairy tale setting. I should know. I'd chosen it myself. Of course, Jessica and her stepmother, Brenda, believed they had found it through a high-end wedding planner. They had presented it to me with breathless excitement, showing me the exorbitant price list with pleading eyes. I had simply nodded, smiled, and told them not to worry about a thing. It was my gift to my daughter. My gift. That's what all of it was. The 5-tier cake, the string quartet, the open bar serving top-shelf liquor, the floral arrangements that filled the air with the scent of lilies and money. All of it flowed from a wellspring of wealth they had never bothered to understand. To them, I was just Arthur. Good old, reliable Arthur. The quiet man who ran a modest consulting firm, who lived in a simple 2-bedroom house, and who, for some reason, always seemed to have enough money to bankroll their increasingly lavish lifestyle. My wife, Jessica's mother, had passed away a decade ago. It was just me and my daughter for a few years, and they were good years. Then Brenda came along. She was vibrant and loud, filling the spaces my late wife's quiet grace had once occupied. At first, I was happy for Jessica. She had a mother figure again. But Brenda's influence was like a slow-acting poison. She taught my daughter that value was measured in brand names and price tags. She taught her that wanting something was the same as deserving it. And she taught her, through 1,000 tiny cuts, that her quiet, unassuming father was a relic of a past life, a necessary utility, but certainly not the main event. I saw the shift in Jessica. The easy affection we once shared was replaced by a transactional sort of love. Calls were no longer to see how I was. They were precursors to a request. A new car. A down payment for a condo she and her new fiancé, Kevin, wanted. A small loan to cover a credit card bill filled with designer purchases. And I, wanting only her happiness, always said yes. I never told them the truth about my finances. I'd sold my first tech company in my late 30s for a sum that would have shocked them into silence. I'd spent the subsequent years quietly investing, growing that fortune into a small empire of real estate and private equity. My modest consulting firm was a boutique operation that managed my own assets. I lived simply because I had nothing to prove. They lived lavishly because they felt they had everything to prove. The wedding was to be Brenda's masterpiece, her grand social debut as the mother of the bride. She had commandeered the entire planning process, with Jessica as her enthusiastic lieutenant. My role was simple: to approve the invoices. And I did, without a word of complaint. The ceremony was beautiful. I held it together as I gave Jessica away to Kevin, a young man who seemed decent enough, if a little too impressed with himself. He worked in finance, in a rapidly growing department at a friend's firm. He had no idea I was the silent partner who had provided the seed capital for that very department. The trouble began at the reception. Guests were finding their seats, guided by an elaborate chart near the entrance. I looked for my name at the head table, where I assumed I would be. It wasn't there. I scanned the other tables, my heart beginning to sink. Finally, I found it. Table 14, tucked away in the back corner, near the kitchens. I was seated with a few distant cousins of the groom and someone's elderly aunt. I felt the sting of it, a sharp, public humiliation. But I'm a man who values dignity above all else. I would not make a scene. I would sit at my assigned table and hold my head high. But Brenda had other plans. As I made my way to the back of the room, She intercepted me, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. Her voice was a stage whisper, designed to be overheard by the guests around us. "Oh, Arthur, there you are," she chirped, linking her arm through mine. "There's been a little mix-up with the seating, just a total oversight. You know how hectic these things are." I knew it was no oversight. It was a calculated move. "We just have so many important people at the head table," she continued, gesturing vaguely towards the front of the room where she, Jessica, and Kevin were holding court. "Kevin's boss is there, and some very influential clients. You understand. We just couldn't squeeze another chair in." "I see my seat is at table 14, I said, my voice even. "I'll be fine there." Her smile tightened. This wasn't the reaction she wanted. She wanted me to be flustered, to argue, to give her the drama she craved. "Well, that's the other thing," she said, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "We had to add a last-minute guest for Kevin's boss, and your seat was the only one we could reassign. It's just dreadful." I stood there, saying nothing. The guests around us were starting to stare, their conversations faltering. This was the moment. The public shaming. Brenda then delivered the killing blow, her voice brightening as if she'd had a stroke of genius. "But I have the perfect solution. The patio doors are open. It's a lovely evening. We can set up a nice little table for you out there. You always said you loved the fresh air. It will be like your own private little dining experience." There it was. She wasn't just seating me in the back. She was removing me from the room entirely, to be put outside, on display for everyone to see. The father of the bride, exiled from the celebration he had paid for. The humiliation was so profound, so breathtakingly cruel, that it transcended anger. It became clarifying. I looked past her at my daughter Jessica. She was watching, her face a mask of discomfort, but she said nothing. She looked away when our eyes met. She made her choice. In that moment, she was no longer just my daughter. She was Brenda's daughter. And Kevin, her new husband, stood beside her, a smug little smirk on his face. He was in on it. A strange calm washed over me. The hurt was there, a deep, cold stone in my gut, but on the surface, there was only stillness. They expected me to rage. They wanted me to yell, to cause a scene, to prove their narrative that I was a difficult, out-of-touch old man. I would do none of those things. I gave Brenda a small, serene smile. "What a thoughtful idea, Brenda," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I would love that. The fresh air will do me good." Her face faltered for a second, confusion flickering in her eyes. This placid acceptance was not in her script, but she recovered quickly, patting my arm condescendingly. "Wonderful. I'll have a waiter set it up right away." I walked to the buffet, filled a plate with food I had no intention of eating, and carried it myself towards the patio doors. A waiter, a young man with kind eyes, rushed to help me. "Sir, let me," he said, looking mortified. "It's quite all right, son," I told him gently. "I can manage." I stepped out into the cool evening air. A small, wobbly table had been placed near a potted plant. It was an afterthought, an insult. I sat down. From my vantage point, I could see the entire ballroom through the floor-to-ceiling glass. I could see them all. Brenda, preening at the head table. Jessica, laughing at something Kevin whispered in her ear. The guests, drinking my champagne and dancing to my band. I was an exhibit. The lonely old father, banished from his own daughter's wedding. Some guests shot me pitying glances. Others pretended not to see me at all. And as I sat there, the cold of the iron chair seeping into my bones, the emotional part of me began to shut down. The hurt father receded, and the businessman, the strategist, the man who had built an empire on logic and foresight, took over. They hadn't just slighted me. They had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of our relationship. They saw me as an open wallet, a utility. They failed to grasp that the person who signs the checks is not a subordinate. They are the source, the foundation. And if you insult the foundation, the entire house comes crashing down. I didn't touch my food. I just sat and watched. And I began to plan. It was not a plan born of hot, impulsive anger, but of cold, crystalline clarity. It was a plan of simple cause and effect, a sequence of administrative tasks. A series of phone calls I would make on Monday morning. First, the house. The large, beautiful four-bedroom colonial where Brenda and Jessica lived. After my first wife died, it was my house. When Jessica turned 18, I had considered adding her name to the deed, but something held me back. When Brenda moved in after we married and subsequently divorced a few years later, I allowed her to stay to provide stability for Jessica. She paid no rent. She lived there as if it were her own. But it wasn't. The deed was in my name, and my name alone. My lawyer would be instructed to begin eviction proceedings. 30 days notice. Legal. Tidy. Impersonal. Second, the money. Jessica's trust fund. I had set it up years ago, a substantial nest egg for her future. She received a generous monthly allowance from it, which she believed was simply family money she was due to gain full control upon her marriage. However, my lawyers, ever prudent, had included a discretionary clause. The grantor, me, retained the right to suspend all payments and control if I felt the beneficiary was acting in a manner that was irresponsible or not in keeping with the family's values. Publicly shunning her father at her own wedding seemed to fit that description perfectly. My financial advisor would receive a call to freeze the account, effective immediately. Third, Kevin, her proud new husband. He was so pleased with his position as a rising star at Northgate Financial, he thought his boss, a man named Robert, was his mentor. He didn't know that Robert was an old college friend of mine, and that Northgate's most profitable division, the one Kevin worked in, had been funded entirely by my capital as a private investment. It was my money that paid his salary. It was my money that funded his bonuses. A simple call to Robert would be all it took. I would explain that I was reevaluating my portfolio and had decided to pull my capital from that particular venture. The entire division would be dissolved. Kevin would be redundant. Fourth, the little things, the symbols of their status. Brenda's gleaming silver Mercedes. It wasn't hers. It was leased by my holding company as a business expense. That lease would be terminated. The car would be collected. The credit cards, the supplementary cards on my primary account that they used for their daily extravagances, would be canceled. And finally, the wedding itself. The beautiful venue. They thought they were paying the standard, eye-watering rental fee. They had no idea I had purchased the entire estate as a real estate investment 2 years prior. The manager they dealt with was on my payroll. They had been given the owner's family rate, which was essentially zero. The bill they had been shown was a fiction. A new, very real bill would be generated, one that included not just the rental fee, but charges for every single thing. Staff overtime, the extra case of champagne, the broken glass, the cleaning fee. It would be an invoice of staggering proportions, and it would be addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Kevin Reynolds. I sat there for an hour, watching the party unfold, my plans solidifying in my mind. Each detail was a clean, logical step, a reaction to their action. It wasn't revenge. It was a rebalancing of the scales, a correction. When the cake was being cut, I stood up. I walked back into the ballroom. The air was thick with heat and laughter. No one seemed to notice me. I made my way to the head table. Brenda saw me coming, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Arthur, are you leaving already?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "Yes," I said calmly. I looked at my daughter. "Jessica, Kevin, I wish you a lifetime of happiness. You truly deserve each other." The double meaning was lost on them. Jessica gave me a quick, distracted hug. "Thanks, Dad." Kevin just nodded, already turning back to his friends. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, out of the estate, and out of their lives. I didn't look back. The drive home was quiet. There was no anger, no tears, just a profound sense of peace. The peace that comes with making a difficult but necessary decision. Sunday was quiet. I went for a long walk. I read the paper. I made myself a simple dinner. My phone remained silent. They were likely basking in the post-wedding glow, nursing hangovers and opening gifts, completely oblivious. Monday morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, I began. The call to my lawyer, David, was first. "David, it's Arthur. I need you to draw up eviction papers for the property at 412 Oak Lane. Standard 30-day notice. No negociations. Sent it via certified mail today. There was a slight pause. Everything all right, Arthur? He asked. Everything is perfectly clear, I replied. The call to my financial advisor was next. Michael, I'm invoking the discretionary clause on Jessica's trust. Freeze all payments and access, effective immediately. Yes, the character clause. The documentation will follow. Then I called Robert. Rob, it's Art. How are you? We chatted for a moment before I got to the point. Listen, I'm restructuring some things. I'm pulling my capital out of the Northgate venture. I know, the timing is abrupt, but it's a business decision. Your other divisions are fine, but that one, my confidence in its leadership has been shaken. You'll have to dissolve it. I'm sorry for the inconvenience to you, but anyone associated with that project needs to be let go. Robert, ever the professional, understood. He knew not to question my decisions. The call to the leasing company was simple. Terminate the lease. Schedule the pickup. The call to the credit card company was even simpler. Cancel the supplementary cards. My last call was to the manager of the wedding venue. Richard, please generate a final, itemized invoice for the Reynolds wedding. Use the full, non-discounted commercial rate. Every fork, every napkin. Bill it directly to the bride and groom. Yes, I know the amount will be significant. That is the point. And then it was done. The dominoes had been set. All I had to do was wait for them to fall. The first tremor hit them on Tuesday. Brenda called me, her voice shrill with confusion. Arthur, the strangest thing happened. The dealership called. They said they're coming to pick up the Mercedes. They said the lease was terminated. It must be some kind of mistake. You need to call them and sort it out. No, Brenda, I said calmly. There's no mistake. The lease is over. What are you talking about? Over? How am I supposed to get around? I imagine you'll figure something out, I said, and gently hung up the phone. Wednesday was Kevin's turn. My phone rang in the evening. It was Jessica, and she was sobbing. Dad, Kevin was fired. They called him in this morning and told him his whole department was being shut down. Just like that. No warning. He's devastated. His boss said the primary investor pulled out. Why would this happen? Sometimes investments don't work out, honey, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. That's just business. Thursday, the certified letter arrived at 412 Oak Lane. The eviction notice. This time, all three of them showed up at my door. They ambushed me as I was bringing in my groceries. Brenda was practically vibrating with rage. Jessica's face was pale and tear-streaked. Kevin looked like a thundercloud. An eviction notice? Brenda shrieked, waving the paper in my face. Have you lost your mind? You're throwing us out of our home. To be precise, I corrected her gently. I am asking you to vacate my home. You have 30 days as required by law. Your home. Kevin scoffed. Jessica grew up in that house. Yes, she did, I agreed. When it was my home. It has always been my home. The deed is in my name. That's when Jessica finally seemed to grasp the scope of the situation. Dad, the trust. I went to the bank for our honeymoon money, and they said it was frozen. They said you did it. Why? Why are you doing all this? This was the moment. The confrontation they had initiated at the wedding, now concluding on my doorstep. I looked at the three of them. Their faces a mixture of fury, panic, and disbelief, and I felt nothing but a quiet, resolute calm. I'm not doing anything to you, I said, my voice low and steady. I'm simply undoing the things I've done for you. For years, I have provided. I gave you a home, a car, an endless supply of money. I funded your education, your lifestyle, your wedding. I did it out of love for my daughter. I expected nothing in return but a little respect, a little common decency. I looked directly at Brenda. At the wedding, you made a choice. You chose to publicly humiliate me, to treat me as something to be discarded, to be hidden away so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of your important guests. Then I looked at Jessica and Kevin, and you stood by and let her. You were complicit. In that moment, you made it very clear what you think of me. You see me not as a father, but as a bank. So, I have decided to close that bank. I explained everything methodically without raising my voice. The house is mine, and I no longer wish for you to live in it. The car was a company perk from my company, a perk which I have revoked. Kevin, your job existed because my money created it. I have simply moved my money elsewhere. And Jessica, the trust was a gift, not a right. It came with the expectation of a certain character, a character you have failed to display. Access is denied. I saved the best for last. Oh, and there's one more thing. You should be receiving a final bill from the wedding venue shortly. You see, I own that estate. You were there as my guests, my family. But you made it clear we are not family. So you will be billed as commercial clients. You wanted a fairy tale wedding. Now you can pay for it. The color drained from their faces. The rage, the entitlement, it all dissolved, replaced by a raw, primal panic. The reality of their situation was crashing down on them like a tidal wave. They weren't independent, successful people being inconvenienced. They were dependents whose sole provider had just turned off the tap. Brenda was the first to break. The mask of superiority crumbled, revealing a desperate, grasping woman. "Arthur, please," she stammered. "We didn't mean it. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding." "Was it a misunderstanding when you sat me outside like a stray animal?" I asked quietly. "Or was it a message?" I believe I received the message loud and clear. "You wanted me out of the picture. Congratulations. You have your wish." They pleaded. They begged. They cried. They promised to change. But the words were hollow. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry for the consequences. I let them exhaust themselves, and then I delivered my final words. "You are all adults. You are a married couple. It is time for you to build your own life with your own resources. I am merely giving you the opportunity to do so. My door is now closed. Please leave my property." They stumbled away, defeated. The aftermath was exactly as I had planned. They were forced to move into a small, cramped apartment. The massive wedding bill arrived, sending them into a spiral of debt they had no means to pay. Kevin, with a sudden termination on his record, struggled to find another job in his field. Brenda, who hadn't worked in 15 years, had to take a job as a cashier at a department store. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that they sold Jessica's expensive wedding ring to make rent. Jessica has tried to call me a few times. I haven't answered. My actions may seem cruel to some, but what I did was not about revenge. It was about justice. It was about teaching a lesson in dignity and respect that could not be taught with kindness. I gave them everything, and they valued none of it. By taking it all away, I have given them one final gift: the opportunity to learn the true value of things. I live a quiet life now. My house is peaceful. My finances are my own. I have my dignity. I learned that kindness, when perpetually unreciprocated, is not a virtue. It is an enabling of dysfunction. They thought they were shaming a weak old man, but all they did was awaken a sleeping giant. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak one. Sometimes, the most powerful statements are not made with loud words, but with the quiet closing of a door and the calm, deliberate signing of a check. Actions have consequences, and they are now living with theirs. And I, for the first time in a very long time, am finally at peace.